Just for those who are joining, we'll just wait a minute or two to allow others to connect in. Looks like we've got quite a few people, but still more to come. Give it one more minute. Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. You're attending the Research Nova Scotia webinar on the application process for the focused research investments. So it's a very simple structure. I'll be giving a presentation over the next several minutes to walk through what it is we're trying to accomplish through this funding opportunity and how those who may be prospective applicants or partners can be more successful in thinking through what they wish to put within their application so that it meets the needs of that of our funding opportunity. And that presentation will be followed by an opportunity to ask questions, for which we'll be using the Q&A function of Zoom, which is one of the buttons on your screen. So it's all done by written process rather than verbal questions, just given the number of people who are attending. Also, this is being recorded and it will be posted as our previous webinars have been to the website. So you're invited, of course, to view it again or to share the link with colleagues who didn't have the opportunity to join today. So the first slide I'll use, maybe one if you've been participated in a previous webinar, is one that has been used before. And this is just to recall that just over a year ago, on the 1st of May of last year, following the passing of Bill 12 in the provincial legislature, within which the Research Nova Scotia Act was changed, that the Act now enables the Minister of Advanced Education to determine the research priorities for Research Nova Scotia. And you'll see three boxes on your screen. The top box is an excerpt from the minister's priorities, in which we are provided with the 7 outcomes grouped into 2 areas that we are to achieve through our funding opportunities. So provincial productivity and economic growth. The second box are 2 excerpts that provide a little more detail about this to emphasize that any funding and activities that we undertake need to align to these research priorities, and that we need to be able to show in due course how we are contributing to measurable changes in these outcomes. And that falls, of course, both to Research Nova Scotia as an organization, but given that these changes are as a result of the funding that we provide and the activities that that enables, that we in turn need to identify researchers and request of them information that allows us to underscore the changes to those outcomes. And then the third and final area is the minister identified 3 priority sectors, which are listed there: natural resources, climate change, clean energy, life sciences and health sciences, and construction and transportation. So our ability to fund things is restricted to those that is going to create provincial productivity or economic growth, that we can demonstrate that that connection is there, and that falls within one or more of those 3 priority sectors that are listed at the bottom. Within our research strategy, which our board of directors approved last fall, we have two mechanisms that we use to identify and support research that achieves those two objectives. We have a convened model and a responsive model. And the ear to the ground, which some of you may be familiar with, we are in the process of reviewing number of EOIs that came in from a deadline that came a couple of weeks ago. Is that these are smaller, they're 2 rounds per year, they're shorter time frame. That's just really to give you context that this is the other mechanism. And so as you're listening through this, if you've not applied to this, uh, because this opens twice per year, we anticipate opening the next round of this in the fall once this current ear to the ground process has concluded. But the one we're here to talk about today is one that we run once per year, the focused research investments, where our organization, Research Nova Scotia, participates as a member of a funding consortium for a larger set of projects that adopts an actively organized and coordinated method in order to achieve those outcomes. So it's not just that it is a bigger research project or a longer research project or even a more complicated research project than what might be funded under ear to the ground. It is actively pursuing that in a coordinated fashion. And so we anticipate funding between 2 and 4 per year through one funding round, and that we anticipate each individual grant to be between 1 and 5 million over 2 to 5 years. And so that's what I'll be speaking to for the duration of this webinar. So if you go to our website now, you will see on it that the Focused Research Investment Opportunity is open. And this is a screen grab from our website. And the two arrows indicate two things I just want to highlight now. So it opened about 2 weeks ago on June the 10th. This is the webinar, which is that first arrow. The deadline you were working to in the initial phase is August 19th. So that's about 7 or so weeks, maybe 8 weeks from now. And that following that intake, by the middle of September, we will have selected up to 6 opportunity spaces to submit an FRI proposal, which there will then be another 2 months or thereabouts to develop the FRI proposal, which will then be selected by January of next year, January of 2027. And you'll see that we'll use the winter period to get things organized, make announcements so that projects can get started and funding can flow by the end of this fiscal year. The second arrow I want to draw your attention to at the bottom is there is a note, links to key resources at the bottom. So the strategic plan is, as I mentioned, what the board of directors of Research Nova Scotia approved in around November of last year, 2025, which describes the way the organization will go about realizing its mandate and delivering on the minister's expectations. But there's the two documents in particular that are important, and really what I'm doing for the rest of this webinar is highlighting a number of key points from these two, is a statement of purpose and the Opportunity Space Proposal Handbook. I do not mean this to sound patronizing, but it is really important, if this is something that you're considering, to spend a good deal of time reviewing these carefully, because it will really help understand what it is we're trying to achieve and the limitations that exist on us for selecting or identifying research that we can fund. So as I mentioned, there is the statement of purpose. This is a new element that we have not had before the FRI and the E2G in this fiscal year that began on the 1st of April. And it really provides a link between the application that people are completing or the proposals that they are developing and the strategy that we have. It really focuses on why we are funded, why we as an organization are funded, and in turn, and in particular, why we fund others to undertake research and what that research is expected to achieve. And it is designed to enable those who are of a mind or are potential applicants to assess the suitability of their ideas. I don't mean suitability in the grand sense. I mean the suitability for the funding that we have before excessive effort or significant effort is put into developing a proposal. And then if that is deemed to be a good fit or a match, then to help readers or potential applicants improve the quality of the proposal that they are preparing. And then the second document, not surprisingly, is the Focus Research Investments Opportunity Space Proposal Handbook. This is the first page of it. It's a PDF that's on our website. This is what you'll be working towards as you develop your proposal. And it has kind of key dates. And as I mentioned, it notes that up to 6 successful applicants will be invited to submit a full proposal and some of the other details. So that's just what the front cover looks like. And most of the rest of this presentation will go through a couple of elements from within that. The first thing to emphasize is that this is a two-phase process. That's how it's described. We're starting with an opportunity space, and then second and separate, although related, is if we have selected those opportunity spaces, they'll be invited to develop a full proposal. So before I get into how those two things relate, I want to spend a moment defining what we mean by opportunity spaces. Depending on where you've come at this particular issue, you could think of it as kind of a business opportunity, commercial opportunity, maybe even an investment thesis. Those may be phrases that you might be used to, but this is really describing what it is that ultimately research that you hope to undertake, where that opportunity lies. So what is the kind of the core elements that makes this an interesting area or a relevant area to pursue? So in other words, what are those sector level challenges that are inhibiting economic growth or productivity that could be addressed through research? So before leaping to what we need to do to address it, it is sketching out or well describing what it is that research will fit within, because what an FRI actually is it is responding to the needs that are identified by that opportunity space. It is also, the space exists because there are partners with whom to work and some degree of existing research capacity. That does not mean that everything has to be here, but there has to be a core set of tools, people, equipment, and so on which to build. Otherwise, we'd be starting new on a particular issue or area, and with really only a short amount of time and 1 to 5 million, we cannot embark on things for which we have no kind of capacity in which we can connect this back to. And then, as I mentioned, the FRI, which comes second, the initiative, the kind of research projects that come out of that are those that respond to the opportunity spaces as defined. And so what applicants need to do at this phase is really focus attention on making a clear and compelling space on why the opportunity space is important and has the potential to generate value in one of those 3 priority sectors. So what that really means is that the application at this phase or at this stage, it's not a summary of a research proposal. That will come. There is an element within the opportunity space proposal that speaks to what the FRI will address, but you're describing the opportunity that FRI will address with some indication of the direction that you'll be taking. And they are selected, and this is from the opportunity guide, on these 5 different areas. And you'll see if you leap down to number 5, that's the one area or the one segment where you have the opportunity to describe what the FRI, if invited, will actually do within that opportunity space. But the rest of what this is evaluating is, how is this a priority? Why is this important here and now to get on with this, that we have an opportunity that we really can't miss, that there's potential here to realize one of the 3 primary outcomes, which I've highlighted in red, and my very next slide is going to speak to those outcomes, why research is needed to solve the problem. And what I mean by that is There are lots of things for which research can contribute to a solution, but if primarily what is inhibiting that growth or productivity improvement isn't the need to discover something, but just greater investment, policy clarity, you know, political priority, managerial competence, then additional research or additional discovery that comes out of the research process is not actually going to realize, even if it's an important issue, if research isn't the limiting factor, then that's not going to get you across the line. Tying this back to some of that pre-existing capacity, that we actually have the expertise, partners, resources, and so on that we can build upon in order to produce a compelling FRI within that opportunity space. That Research Nova Scotia is the right organization to invest. This is not a substitute for an SRE needy tax credit or what a COA might fund or various other organizations like Tri-Council and so on. That part of the reason we've put information broadly available on what our strategy is and how we intend to deliver is we want to make sure that there is the opportunity to understand what our role within the ecosystem is so that we attract proposals that are tailored or particularly well suited to what Research Nova Scotia's role within this ecosystem is. And then finally, as I mentioned, that this is an area that's suitable for an FRI, that really a coordinated effort across groups is the mechanism that is particularly well suited to achieve those one or more of those three primary outcomes, which I'll now speak to. So in the statement of purpose, there's considerably more detail on these outcomes. And these came out of our recognition from the pilot phase of this that occurred from November of last year to the end of the last fiscal year when we ran a pilot E2G round and a pilot FRI round, that simply providing the minister's expected economic outcomes and then saying, give us a research project that you think is going to achieve them, was too many steps along without providing enough understanding of what we really meant and how to achieve those ministerial outcomes. So what we've done is taken those and shaped them into what we hope to be more clear indications of what economic growth or productivity means. And you'll see in that guide that there is a set of indicators that show how you can connect what you are identifying to tie them to these particular outcomes. So market creation or growth, not surprising that increased economic value or wealth through new products and so on. Productivity gains has two different dimensions where it is an improved efficiency or delivery within a particular limitation of resources. So it is improvement of efficiency per unit of capital, for instance, where you are able to produce something at a lower energy intensity and therefore lower cost. So there is that connection between it's more efficient than or more productive than it was before. And then this third area, recognizing that in some respects or in some instances, that it is in effect what is inhibiting that growth is a limited policy or regulatory environment, and that there are improvements that can be made to that environment that will in fact unlock that economic opportunity. And that's an idea that's not fully captured within the market creation productivity gains. And so this is different from simply saying there is work that would inform better policy in such and such an area. This needs to kind of draw attention to how the work fits into the policy or regulatory development process, public guidance, procurement policy, and so on, so that you can see those effects that would come from market creation or productivity gains. So the written application, which is the phase that we're in now, that's open now. There is the opportunity now to start that. This is being done through a link on our website. It will take you to the screenshot that's at the top of this. That's the first thing that you will see. And there are really kind of two major sections. It's done through Smart Simple, which is kind of commonly available software. And as I said, there's these two sections. There's a cover page where you fill in a bunch of mandatory fields, obviously name, contact information, anticipated project value. That is both how much you expect to require of Research Nova Scotia and how much you see the overall project requiring, as well as the time frame, because there is a range in that time frame. That's all pretty boilerplate information, kind of high level. And then the proposal, the second part, is essentially a single question that allows you to use the space as you wish, under a maximum of 3,000 words, to address the 5 evaluation areas. So we strongly encourage you to use subheadings so that we can kind of follow along the logic, but recognizing that in some cases you're going to need to spend more time on one or more of those 5 areas. We're leaving it completely open to enable applicants to make the case in the way they think is most compelling. And now I'll walk through where those areas are. So the sections of this written application for the opportunity space asks you to address the following 5 areas, which then, of course, maps to the evaluation that we have to undertake to identify the opportunity spaces that will invite to develop a full proposal for an FRI. So the first, describe how this is a priority. Second, describe the research and its relevance to achieving the outcomes within that priority area. Why an active coordination model is appropriate and timely. How the expertise and interest exists here or can be developed based on a core level of opportunity of existing capacity that is already here. And then finally, if invited, what would the FRI be that you would build based within this opportunity space if selected? So a few points of emphasis as I'm coming to the end of the formal presentation part. Again, this is not a summary of a research project. What we're looking to do is draw out where these opportunities lie and where the most opportune areas to develop an FRI might be. If you have read the strategy and the 3-year operating plan that's on our website dating back from last November, this opportunity space proposal process is a substitute for an alternative mechanism that we had anticipated using, which I don't really need to go into a huge amount of detail, but within those 3 sectors, the other route that we could have gone down is, say, for each of those sectors or subsectors, let's gather together the main beneficiaries or potential users of research and identify where the key areas are, and then work back with the research community on those that are selected to work up an FRI. For a whole host of reasons, including it's difficult to find good representation across all the interests within what those sectors might be or subsectors, and the challenges of working through the summer where availability can be a challenge. This is more open and it's more transparent and it's more inviting across a much broader range of ideas that can come in. So if you want to kind of think of it that way, rather than going through a process where we're meeting as a group to say, where are those opportunities lie? This is an opportunity, or this is a mechanism, I meant to say, where you can set those out on paper and that we can then select on the basis of what's written as opposed to a committee discussion. And as I said, although many will want to move quickly towards the research proposal that will come out of it, we have the capacity to identify up to 6. It may not be 6, it may be 4, it may be some number less than 6 that we believe has the characteristics and the merit of the opportunity spaces and the capacity to develop into a full proposal. The last part of this page on the bottom half, you'll see a table on the right-hand side with a roughly green and a roughly orange or red with yes and no. What's on the left-hand side are the five different aspects of what we mean by a research project for Research Nova Scotia. So there's really 2 points I want to make on this. And the first one is relatively more easily made, and that's what's written to the left, that this speaks to the ambitions and characteristics of the FRI. It's not a list of eligible expenses. So, for instance, within the creative row, it says in the no column, data collection or monitoring program. That does not mean that an FRI in due course cannot engage in collecting data or any of the other aspects. It's just that this program is not about developing a monitoring program, no matter how worthwhile that may be. So it is not, as I said, a set of eligible expenses. It is what is the description of the ambition of what the FRI will be intended to do. The second reason for putting it up there is that the challenge for Research Nova Scotia is that a year ago, as I mentioned, our mandate was substantially amended to pursue this overtly economic focus, which is consistent across a number of different publicly funded organizations where there is a desire on behalf of the government to ensure that its various bodies and resources are being devoted in service of providing economic growth and opportunities for the province. This can be a challenging thing for the active research, which is very early in that development phase. And so, as we have attempted, in particular through the documents that I pointed to you earlier, to connect that set of high-level objectives the government has given us through those outcomes to the active research, we've really leaned heavily on the what's come through the OECD on those five characteristics of research to maintain or preserve that kind of discovery element, even though the expectation is that these are being developed for the purpose of developing economic outcomes. The other kind of dimension to this is that we are asking through this process for the proposals to develop an argument of what they're proposing to do and how it hits these different elements. We know that it can be really tricky to develop something, especially around transferable, where the value comes from developing technique or technology that is held by the proponent or by the person developing that technology to the exclusion of others. I recognize that that is a very effective way in many cases of actually developing growth opportunities. But as a research organization, we do need to identify research that has broader sector level benefits. And so this is kind of a tension point. There is no easy way or clear way to decisively identify a dividing point between what's in and what's out and how we treat IP and how that has to be shared and what mechanisms you share. The open invitation here is to spend time thinking through what these mean and then make the argument back to us on how the opportunity space can open up that potential value through an FRI across these different dimensions. So we're not trying to um, uh, hide the difficulties that are, I know these are going to be challenging issues, and we are eagerly looking for creative and interesting ways to work with the limitations and direction of research as it leads to economic development and growth and productivity. So that's the end of the kind of formal presentation. I expect that some at least will have questions. The email address I've put down at the bottom is where you can continue to ask questions that haven't had a time to answer here. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and go to the Q&A function to see where the opportunities. All right. So I'll answer these questions as I get them. So what if the issues If the issues isn't policy clarity, but the requirement for actual policy change or new or modified regulations to remove obstacles that research has revealed, would that count? So what I'd say is that if it's simply policy development without that research aspect, then that would be excluded. But if there is a discovery element that research can illuminate that would help develop that particular policy, that's a difference between kind of clarity and kind of new or modified development, then that would count. The key thing is that there needs to be the receptor community. There has to be that kind of demand pull rather than that producer push. So simply doing work because the applicant believes that it is relevant is one thing. There's lots that's out there that expects would contribute to improved development or develop at all. But there needs to be that recognition that there is that need for that kind of work that can start pulling that out. If that isn't a sufficient kind of clear answer, then I'm happy to follow up afterwards. Uh, the next question is, how is project value different from project budget? So the two areas within that cover page simply says how much is the expected request from Research Nova Scotia versus the overall expenditures associated with delivering on the FRI. So that would include funding from other sources that would be connected into or be matched with or leveraged with the Research Nova Scotia investment. And again, if any of this doesn't, if I have not properly interpreted, I'm just reading these on the fly, then please follow up through that email address. The next question is, could an FRI be used to further an initiative that is already in progress? The proposed activity would be for net new work to further outcomes that have been shown to require further research. Yes, it can certainly build on an existing initiative, but it needs to be something that is more. It can't simply be this is underway and we ran out of money and we need to kind of add in additional funders to make it happen. But you can certainly build on something that's already in progress. The next question, where will we be able to find the recording for this presentation? So on the website, under the FRI opportunities page, there's a tab at the top called funding opportunities. Click on FRI. The presentation the webinar is there, and Megan will have to advise on whether we actually post the slides or whether it's just done through a broadcast or the file of the webinar itself. But you may have noticed that the structure I gave for the slides was on 8.5 by 11. That's so that it can be further distributed if need be. The next question is, can you say more about what active coordination model is? Yes. So there are many research intake processes or funding processes are for issues where having a degree of diversity in ways questions are being addressed is what's of value because we don't actually know enough in order to coordinate deliberately towards achieving an outcome. But where that in and of itself, that disconnected kind of model or that independent model is unlikely to yield the results, when you start with the outcome and then mount the argument of how research needs to be put together deliberately in order to achieve it, that's what we mean by active coordination. That it is not simply a large, complicated research project. It is that solving the problem benefits from having line of sight over the constituent projects that need to work together. That doesn't mean they're doing the same thing at the same time, but they need to be equally aware of what each other are producing so that in combination, they are working towards achieving that objective. That's what's meant by an active coordination model. There is a bit more detail within some of the background documents as well that are noted on the website. The next question is, thank you. The applicant has to be part of the university or can it be employee has an idea? Also, the applicant can be from Alberta. So the applicant need not be part of the university. It is open to others. Ultimately, in due course, if invited to produce an FRI or an FRI application, then there has to be the capacity to actually deliver on it. So there has to be some connection into an organization that can actually provide those research, the research capacity. Can be an employee who has an idea. Well, yes, but if it's going to include the participation of the employer or the use of the employee's time at the FRI stage, it would be highly advisable that it be sanctioned by or be supported by the employer, but the actual applicant can be the person filling out the application can be an employee that has the idea. But again, if it's connected into the work of that employer, then that needs to be kind of settled uh, before going any further. If this is a kind of a new idea, new direction, and there is no connection, well, then the applicant's not actually acting in the capacity as an employee, but as someone else. Can the applicant be from Alberta? Well, the relevance has to be to Nova Scotia, and it has to be in to the benefit of Nova Scotia. Typically, that's going to favor things that originate within Nova Scotia, but there isn't a kind of a residency test. I suggest that rather than trying to answer that in the abstract without knowing kind of what's behind it, that you get in touch and kind of walk through what your particular circumstances are that led to that question, and we can work through what the requirements might be. The next question, in relation to the priority sectors, do applications need to speak to all three, or can it be just one or two? Just one or two. So whatever the most relevant priority sectors, I'd say spend more time making a compelling argument on the most relevant sector rather than trying to cover all. And equally, when tying it to the outcomes, focus on where there is legitimate and defendable connection to that outcome rather than trying to make it seem relevant across things where it's more tangentially related. So focus on where it most fits. Next question. On the website, it states that the total amount for this call is 6 million. In the presentation, I heard that funding may be available for 2 to 4 programs for 1 to 5 million. Yeah, so all those things are correct, and this is how it works. So the Board of Directors for Research Nova Scotia has approved a total research budget for FRI of 6 million. We have a separate budget for E to G of 4 million across 2 rounds. We have some flexibility at the margins between that, but not a lot. So we are putting as a target as 6 million. But because there is a range for how much can be applied for and awarded of 1 to 5, that means that we have the capacity. We'll certainly fund if we spend the full 6 million of no fewer than 2, because if the maximum is 5, then that could lead to a 1 5 million and 1 million. Or we could fund several smaller budgeted, and we gave 4 as an indication. I mean, it could be 5 $1 million projects, but that's the way those numbers relate. The next question, can the Research Nova Scotia portion be 100% of the budget? No. This is different from, for those of you who are familiar with the first round of FRI before our mandate changed. In those cases, we were able to fully fund the FRI. In this particular case, there has to be other funders. We have not specified what that level is. We have left it open, partly because if we specify an amount, then it encourages people to work to that minimum. And instead, what we're saying is that we need to be a co-funder, and others participating, in particular when there's funding involved, is an indication of desire of others to see this go forward. And so we do not have the budget to fully fund everything, not as we did in the first round. And so we need to see others participating, including with a contribution to the budget, which is why in that first page, there is both what are you asking for Research Nova Scotia and what is the anticipated total value of the project. The next question, what should be the level of research? Some results is needed or an idea would work as well. I'm not completely certain how to answer what you mean by level, and whether you mean kind of basic or fundamental research versus applied, or whether it's kind of notional with some idea of what methodology would be applied versus a more comprehensively thought out kind of stem to stern direction, but maybe I'll make some general comments. And if I haven't hit what you're asking for, I'd invite you to get in touch for clarification. Is that if it is indeed basic versus applied, although overall what needs to happen is research is applied in order to realize the economic objectives that we've been provided, that there are discoveries that may constitute what would be identified as a fairly fundamental level of discovery. But that has to be based on an assessment that uncovering that particular area is what is important to identifying where or unlocking that particular opportunity. Um, the other thing I think I should probably say in the context of this question, but could have said in the others, is that I want to make sure that people don't get ahead of themselves. Although it's great that you're thinking ahead to what the FRI might look like, this phase over the next 7 or 8 weeks is really focusing on what the opportunity looks like within which research would then contribute. So it is fine at this stage to, in the opportunity space application, is to give an indication of where those research areas are, such that we have confidence that thought has been given to what those research questions would look like and that there's competence to address them. But the focus really needs to be on those other areas to demonstrate the value of pursuing something in this area. The next question is, can you explain more what interested industry should be, and if they have to be identified before the proposal submission? So when I say interested industry, this wouldn't necessarily apply if the ambition is towards improved policy or regulation. That's not necessarily industry directly, although because it is about unlocking economic opportunity, industry would nevertheless be an interested party because they would be directly affected by the direction those regulations took. But in that particular case, the interested industry would be those who would have a degree of responsibility for the direction that those regulations or the policy direction took. So when I say what that should be a concrete indication that there is acknowledgement or agreement that what this researcher is proposing to do is an important aspect of unlocking the economic opportunity that is there before them. So where there is an potential application by industry, there needs to be something more than just an assertion that industry is out there and no doubt this would be a valuable value to them. But this doesn't need to be, a purchase order to say if this is created, we're going to buy it. So I'm providing general guidance that there has to be this degree of engagement, but we're not asking, there's no requirement for everything to be lined up prior to even putting together a proposal on the research program, which is the second phase. What we're looking for at this phase is confirmation that this is truly an important area in which work would be welcome, and that they would, in most respects, be a contributor in some way to it. I don't necessarily financial, but they would have an active interest in contributing to the development of the work. Again, if that's not kind of hitting what you have in mind, please get in touch. Next question. How would an industry partner actually partner with a research institution, particularly if it is the industry partner that is proposing the possible research questions to address a sector-wide issue? So an industry partner is welcome to themselves put forward a proposal for an opportunity space, and describe where that opportunities lies. That doesn't necessarily require at that stage a partner with a research institution. So we have funded in the most recent round, for example, of Ear to the Ground, funding has gone to an industry participant. There is no partner research institute institution in that case because they are undertaking the work in order to deliver to undertake the research process. It's just that doesn't diminish the requirement for a degree of broad application or transferability of the results. This is not a substitute or a funding model for corporate R&D. There are other programs that are suited to that, whether they're properly done or adequately funded is a separate issue, but this is not a substitute for kind of a corporate R&D program. I hope that addressed the issue. I'm not entirely certain if I grasped what it meant. Next question is, can the contribution be in kind? Yes, it can be. But it has to be, there's varying kinds of in kind, I guess. And so a demonstration of a kind of a concrete in kind that's appropriately valued would be very welcome. Would make for a stronger description. The next question is a portion of paid employees' time considered in-kind or cash contribution? For example, if a private sector company dedicates 40% of employees' time to the project and the employee's salary is 100K, is that 100K in-kind or cash? So first of all, those that need to participate in the research itself, and bearing in mind that this is something that would be described in the FRI proposal in the second phase, not so much in the opportunity space, although I recognize that in building towards a total request that you need to kind of understand what's in and what's out. But so I will touch on it, is that if an existing employee needs to dedicate that time, even though they are existing employee, if you then need to bring in others to offset the divergence of someone's attention to that work, then that's a real cost that's associated with the proposal and an eligible expense. If it's simply that this is what the company's doing anyway, and then that's not an additional expense to undertake this research project. It is as to whether it's cash or in kind. If the funds are already it's the same as data. If you are providing data or you're providing someone's time, that is an in-kind contribution. What you've developed there is a very effective way to value what that in-kind contribution would be, because you've got how much of the time they're spending and what that's costing you. So that gives you a way to value that particular in-kind contribution. The next question, and I know I perhaps went a little bit beyond what that question asked, but in some cases, these questions offer an opportunity to illuminate a broader kind of set of issues around things around contribution of how companies can contribute and treatment of the cash and in kind. The next question is, for matching funding, could we use research grant money that has already been acquired? Yes. So if there is already funding secured, as long as it's not simply a resubmission of an existing grant that doesn't connect with the purpose or objective of this research program, if they happen to align perfectly, well, that's great. Much of the work has been done for you, but you can certainly leverage other funding, whether it came from a funding raise or from another research funding agency, then that can be used as a contribution to a new project. Yeah, it doesn't have to be kind of new money that you'd get after a certain date. Just before I answer the next question, I saw someone actually put their hand up. I can't follow that along, so if you've got a question, just build that into the Q&A if you don't mind. The next question is, it seems that the goals of the FRI program fit somewhere in between the goals of the tri-councils and ACOA. Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Can you speak more to the distinction? Could co-funding from the tri-councils or from ACOA be appropriate for an opportunity that benefits Nova Scotia economically through research in the priority sectors? Yes, so absolutely. I can see funding from economic development agencies like ACOA or like InvestNS. InvestNS has a variety of different funding programs that provide assistance for activities that would be in the research area, perhaps with a different objective or different set of acceptable costs to this program. but that can certainly be part of the mix. Equally, the tri-councils as well as CFI, they are active research funders, and you could certainly use this program to build on the kind of support received from the tri-councils or Horizon Europe or any others, but then build on that to make particular effort in service of those economic objectives that we're required to make progress towards. So use our funding to kind of use, say, the equipment from CFI in service of the Research Nova Scotia objectives. The next question is, will the 6 million allocated to this FRI be divided across the identified priority sectors? In other words, is the intention to fund at least one project from each sector, or will all proposals be assessed together regardless of sector? So there is no requirement to allocate equally between them, or that we'll pick one sector this time and let the others drop. We do need to look across the kind of the cohort to make sure that we have some degree of balance, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to spread it all across. What we're looking for is where the real opportunities lie and where the best investment sits. And in some cases, that really may focus, for a variety of different reasons, really hone in on one of those sectors. Over time, since our intention is to offer the FRI opportunity year after year, that over time, we develop a research portfolio that is making progress or making a contribution to each of those priority sectors. But there's kind of two additional comments. Those sectors may change because the minister has the opportunity to adjust those sectors at any time. So we don't want to kind of lock into a kind of model where this year we're going to do a climate one and next year we're going to do a construction and transportation. We're saying it's open across all three, and that over time we want to deliver on those priorities. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that they have varying levels of a research-related contribution to the value that's embedded within that sector. And that changes over time as things happen. So it may be that this year, or in this particular phase of the economy, there really is a greater opportunity within one of those sectors than the others. And so that we are going to then prioritize research because it is particularly well suited to the value opportunity that fits within that sector. The next question is, does industry mean private sector? Can it mean sector more broadly, such as military, public health, both funded by public money? So this has to have a true economic contribution. Now, of course, military, public health, and so on are spending public funds, but the focus on those outcomes, less on who owns them, but what those outcomes are. We need to see economic growth. We need to see productivity. If, for instance, in public health, offsetting costs or reducing costs by finding efficiencies within the health system, it's not that there's no economic value to that. I'm not arguing that in the slightest, but it has to be something that is better than the abstract connection that you only have an economy and people working that economy if you have healthy people. I'm not dismissing that as a connection, but that's not an outcome that we can pursue. But also there has to be kind of an obvious connection between, if you're going to rest on those savings, that those funds are harvested and redeployed in something that has economic value, which within the public health system is a difficult case to make. It usually is something that induces additional demand or is diverted in other public expenditures without the corresponding growth or productivity, the growth or productivity evidence after the fact. I hope that if that doesn't address that particular issue, you can come back after the webinar. So we got 5 minutes and still a few questions here. Question regarding the FRI application itself. Is there a document which outlines eligible and ineligible expenses? On the website, there is material that talks about eligible and ineligible expenses. If you can't find that, I'll ask Megan, send a note, and Megan or someone else here will point you directly to where you need to go to look within that policy environment. We have a set of expenses which we can fund or not. Generally speaking, we can fund research work, not overhead that's not connected to the delivery of research project, and we don't fund organizations. We fund research projects, but a variety of different expenses that are directly related to the delivery of that research project, including equipment, operating costs, people, and so on. The next question, what will be the makeup of the reviewers of the grant? You'll notice in there that there is reference to industry participants in evaluating the opportunity space. So we are expecting there to be, maybe I should have phrased it as end users, so those who would apply the research in service of achieving those economic outcomes. We need to validate that the assertions that the opportunity exists with those who essentially own what that opportunity is as it relates to an economic opportunity. So we are being, at this stage, deliberately vague on who they will be, because we need to see what those opportunity spaces are so that they can be specifically tailored to where those opportunities lie. So we will need to identify those who have the necessary background and understanding of the circumstances in Nova Scotia to be able to make the assessment that that opportunity does exist, and an FRI, if developed in that area, has the possibility or the prospect of contributing usable, applicable information in service of achieving those economic growth and productivity objectives. So I know that's not a set of names, but that's what their role is, and it is advisory. Ultimately, we have to take accountability for the choices we make. So we are soliciting additional input or feedback from those with sector-specific or subject matter expertise within those particular domains to help us make our choices. Ultimately, in due course, consistent with all the research funding that we provide, no matter what mechanism we use, a condition of funding is that it has to have sufficient scientific quality or merit, but that's not the basis on which we choose what's desirable. It's the basis on which we ensure that the quality of the work has the probability of achieving the objectives following that methodology with that particular budget, with that particular team, and so on. But that happens after we've selected the opportunity space through this first phase. The next question, and we've got 2 minutes, so I'll try and make through as quickly as I can. Can you clarify the appropriate industry engagement? For example, if the primary partner is a researcher who is launching a private enterprise, would this be inappropriate? Not necessarily, but I just encourage you to recall that this is not as kind of a R&D startup fund for a researcher who has a mind to set up a company for which IP would be retained as a result of this particular process or this particular funding opportunity to create knowledge that would then provide the substance or the basis for that particular company. If the corporate structure is such that a researcher is best suited to set up an enterprise that would then enable most effectively the research process to occur, but it still maintains those 5 aspects of what research is, of being novel and transferable and all that sort of thing, then there's no problem with having a private enterprise undertaking the research that originated as an individual researcher. Okay, I can fit in one more question. Should teams aim to have study sites or collaborators throughout the province? Not necessarily. We do need to be mindful that over time, we are Research Nova Scotia, which covers the full province. And so just like the answer I gave to, are we trying to cover all the sectors? We're not trying to cover necessarily every part of the province, but it behooves us to recognize that there is relevant research to different areas of the province. So have the study sites where it most makes sense to pursue the research that is going to answer the questions that unlocks the economic opportunity. And the study site may be different from where that economic opportunity lies once the research is applied. So I'd say there's some value to it, but that's not necessarily going to, what makes most sense is that the sites and the collaborators have been chosen on the basis of their suitability to the project that will be proposed if the opportunity space is selected. So I hope that answered the question. And as with everyone, I invite you to follow up if there's anything more. So we've reached the end of the hour. I hope that provided useful information for a good number of participants. So I thank you for your time. And again, if you have additional um, questions or you want clarification on anything I've provided, then please use the contact details that are on our website and we'll go from there. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.